Around lunchtime on August 25th, 2012, a young woman named Grace was standing in a public restroom in front of the mirror in southern Iceland applying makeup. Someone knocked on the door and Grace quickly shouted an apology, but then made no move to finish up. Grace was in the middle of a solo bus trip across Iceland, and she was feeling kind of gross from all the travel. Every day around noon, the tour bus she was on would make a pit stop for lunch at whatever touristy location was nearby. And today they were at Eldgjá, which is the largest volcanic canyon in the world. Now, usually, Grace would use these pit stops not just to get lunch, but also to walk around and see the sights. But today, she was using this break just to freshen up. So Grace finished putting on her eyeliner and put her hair up in a high ponytail, and then she changed her shirt, stuffing her old one back into her backpack. Then she stepped out of the bathroom into a large parking lot, and she saw her tour bus on the other side, and she saw other tour members making their way on board. Grace hustled across the lot, got onto the bus, and settled back into her seat. Only a few minutes later, the driver stood up and announced to the bus that it was time to leave. But before they left, he did what he did at every single stop. He did a head count, just to make sure nobody got left behind. Now, typically, Grace did not pay much attention to the driver when he did this head count. It was a very administrative thing. She would just sit there looking out the window waiting for the bus to start. But on this day, at some point, as Grace was sitting there, she realized the head count was taking a really long time. And when she noticed that, she looked up at the driver, and he looked visibly upset. And he was clearly doing the head count over and over again, like he was really trying to make sure he was doing it right. And then finally, the driver just announced to Grace and all the other people on the bus that they couldn't go anywhere because somebody from their tour group was missing. Now, the first thing they did is they just sat there and waited for about an hour, just hoping that this missing person would turn up. But when they didn't, the driver called the police. So this area, Eldgjá, is a sprawling canyon that was formed more than 1,000 years earlier during a volcanic eruption. The canyon itself is very deep, and it has steep walls on either side, and at the bottom is all this volcanic debris. So it's beautiful to look at, but it's pretty difficult to navigate. And so if somebody was exploring this area on their own and somehow got lost in the process, this could become a very dangerous place for them very quickly. So when the bus driver called the police to report a missing tour group member in this particular area, the police immediately sent out a search and rescue party. And when they arrived, the first thing they did was interview the remaining tour group members to try to figure out who the missing person actually was, because it wasn't clear yet. Pretty quickly, some of the tour group members recalled seeing this young woman of Asian descent who was wearing dark clothes and was carrying a light-colored bag who had left the bus at the beginning of lunch and had not returned. Now, Grace had not personally seen this young woman, and she told police as much when she was interviewed. But she, like basically everybody else on the tour, immediately volunteered to help with the search. So for the entire rest of the day, that is what Grace and the others all did. They searched for this missing person. Grace was teamed up with another member of the tour as well as a trained rescuer, and they walked out into the canyon, searching along a grid pattern with the rest of the team. After a few hours with no luck, officials sent in more rescuers and a helicopter. And by the time the night fell, the entire canyon was lit up by searchlights, and you could barely hear anything over the sound of the helicopter making repeated passes overhead. But despite this enormous effort, there still was no sign of the missing tourist. Finally, at around 3 a.m., Grace broke off from the search and returned to the bus to get some sleep. But before settling into her seat, Grace opened up her backpack to pull out some makeup wipes, and as she did that, something inside of her bag caught her eye. And when she saw it, she froze. She stared at this object, and as she did, she felt herself break out in a cold sweat, because suddenly she knew exactly where this missing woman was. It would turn out that over the course of the previous day, the people on board the bus made a series of small mistakes, but together they snowballed and turned into one huge mistake. First, the bus driver had made a mistake with his head count. Not the head count he had done that afternoon, but the one he had done earlier that day, before they drove to Eldgjá. That morning, he had accidentally counted one too many people on board the bus and not realized it. Then, that afternoon, when he had counted again and actually had the right number of people on board, he thought there was a missing person. Next, the description of the woman who had gotten off the bus and didn't come back, the so-called missing person, that description had only been half correct. So yes, there had been a young woman of Asian descent wearing a dark sweatshirt, carrying a light-colored bag. She'd gotten off the bus, but she did get back on. Except that when she did, she looked different, and so nobody recognized her. And this was because this woman had gotten off the bus to go to the restroom to freshen up. She had put on makeup, she had put her hair up in a ponytail, and she had taken off her dark-colored sweatshirt. The object that Grace found in her backpack that made her realize that she knew exactly where this missing woman was her dark-colored sweatshirt inside of her light-colored backpack. And it was at that exact moment that Grace knew. The person that she had spent the last 15 hours searching for was herself.